There's so much focus on what happened in 2020 and dissecting those voter results. But what stood out to me is the trends that we see in 2020 with these big urban areas, 95 out of 100 metro areas voting for Joe Biden. That's part of a trend that's been happening in the last 20 years. With almost every election, Democrats are gaining more and more in urban areas, basically becoming the party of big cities and more highly educated voters. And Republicans are doing the opposite. Republicans used to carry a lot more large cities. Now they are mainly the party of rural America and small cities and Americans who don't have college degrees. And that's a really big divide. Normally, since Ronald Reagan made that as comments back in 1980 and famously said, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" The general assumption has been if people are better off, if their community is growing and their personal pocketbook's doing well, that they would vote to keep the current president in office. And if they're not doing well, they would vote for a new president. But we saw the total opposite in 2020.
We, the people, we've won with the most votes ever cast on a presidential ticket in the history of the nation.
Basically, what happened is thriving areas or more thriving areas voted for Joe Biden, and areas that are lagging behind voted for President Trump. So areas where there wasn't as much job growth or where conditions don't look as good. And that's been predominantly rural areas and smaller cities.
And if you vote for me, prosperity will surge.
He tried to drain the swamp and it didn't happen. Now they're going to get him out.
And a lot of people have been focused on places like Miami-Dade County or the Osceola County with near Disney World in Florida. Why did those places that were heavily Hispanic vote for Donald Trump? And I don't have all the answers, but the economics on the ground tell us those are the two counties in Florida with the highest unemployment rates right now. So it follows this pattern that we were talking about of places that were hurting more or lagging behind other areas voting for Trump.
He's bringing back the economy. He's brought back jobs. He's caring about the American people where no other politician has cared because Donald Trump is not a politician.
People do seem to trust President Trump on the economy. That perhaps they remember back in before the pandemic when unemployment was at a 50-year low and sentiment about the economy, feelings were at the highest since the 1990s back in February. I know that feels like ages ago, but people do give Trump credit for that. So I think people were kind of surprised to see the counties with Phoenix or Jacksonville, Florida, or counties outside of Austin or Dallas or Denver. All those places have tended to be some of the fastest growing parts of the United States in the last few years. And they swung to Joe Biden. They swung from red to blue. I think what scares me looking at what we found and what others have found is everything points to America remaining divided culturally, politically, and economically. We talk about the urban versus rural divide. It's also basically a divide on digital economy versus the blue collar economy. So a very forward-looking economy of the future versus places that could be forward-looking but are still much more ready to accept President Trump's message of let's go back to the 60s or the 80s to periods when the blue collar economy was thriving more in the United States. The biggest challenge for Joe Biden and for Democrats broadly going forward is if he really wants to be the president for all the country, he's got to find a way to reach out to rural America.